The girl was 9 years old, and she saved his life with 3 words. Don't sign it. Howard Callahan had built his law firm from a single rented desk in a strip mall on the outskirts of Hamilton, Ontario. That was 31 years ago. By the time he turned 63, Callahan and Associates occupied the top 2 floors of a glass tower on King Street West, and Howard's name was the kind that got mentioned quietly in rooms where real decisions were made. He was not flashy about it. He drove a sensible car, wore the same brand of wool suit he'd worn since his 40s, and every Sunday morning he walked 3 blocks to the same bakery for the same coffee and the same raisin scone he'd been ordering since his wife, Carol, first brought him there on their second date. Carol had been gone 4 years now, pancreatic cancer, fast and merciless. Howard still bought 2 scones on Sunday mornings and ate them both, alone at the window table, because he didn't know how to stop. His daughter, Evelyn, checked on him, called on Tuesdays, visited on the last Sunday of each month. She lived in Guelph with her husband, Marcus, and their daughter, Poppy, who was 9 and serious about everything. Her drawings, her opinions about which books were worth reading, and the particular way scrambled eggs should be made, which apparently involved more butter than any reasonable adult would consider appropriate. Howard adored Poppy, off Carol in ways that were too precise to explain. I can do that. The stillness she had when she was thinking. The way she looked directly at you when she was trying to decide whether to trust you. He didn't see them as often as he should have. That was what Evelyn, but consistently, the way you say something when you've long given up, hope that it will change anything. The trouble began, as it often does, with a person who seemed too good. Her name was Diane Ashworth. She came to Callahan and Associates as a senior financial consultant, referred by a colleague Howard trusted, a man named Patterson who'd known her for years. She was 50, efficient, and extraordinarily competent. Within 8 months, she had restructured the firm's retirement fund, renegotiated 3 vendor contracts, and identified a tax exposure no one had caught in a decade. Howard gave her a significant raise and began to copy her on correspondence he'd never shared with anyone outside his inner circle. He told Evelyn about her during one of the Tuesday calls. She sounds capable, Evelyn said. More than capable. She's the best hire I've made in 10 years. There was a pause on the line that Howard didn't register at the time. Just be careful, Dad. You trust people quickly. I trust people appropriately, he said. Evelyn let it go. What Howard didn't know, what he had no reason to look for, was that Diane Ashworth had done this before. Not at a law firm, at a family-owned property company in London, Ontario, where she had spent 3 years building trust with the founder, a widower in his late 60s, before quietly moving assets through a series of holding companies that took forensic accountants 14 months to untangle. The founder had died before the case went to trial. The charges were stayed. Diane had walked out of the building and eventually carefully rebuilt herself elsewhere. She was patient. That was her real skill. She never moved quickly. She never asked for things that seemed unreasonable. She waited until the person across from her had stopped looking. By the time Howard stopped looking, she had already begun. The documents she prepared were thorough. That was the first thing his lawyer noticed later. Not Howard's own lawyers, who were too close, but the outside counsel eventually brought in. The paperwork authorizing the transfer of Howard's personal investment holdings into a newly structured management vehicle was dense and technical and formatted in the precise style of every legitimate document Howard had signed over 30 years, if you read quickly. And Howard, who was tired and had been managing a difficult litigation file for 6 weeks, you read quickly. He scheduled the signing for a Friday afternoon in late October. Evelyn had come down that weekend, the last Sunday of the month. She brought Marcus and Poppy, and they were staying at Howard's house in Ancaster, the one he'd shared with Carol, the one with the big back garden that Carol had planted, and that Howard kept up poorly but refused to change. Poppy had been given the guest room on the 2nd floor, the one with the window that looked out over the driveway. She was an early riser. Saturday morning, just past 6, she was sitting on the window seat with a book when she saw the black car pull up to the front of the house. She recognized Diane Ashworth because she had met her once at the office, when Evelyn brought her by to drop off some paperwork and Howard had introduced them in the hallway. Poppy had shaken the woman's hand and said it was nice to meet her. Diane had smiled and said something about what a polite young lady she was, and Poppy had smiled back, and later in the car she told her mother that the woman had cold hands. It's October, Evelyn had said. It wasn't cold outside, Poppy said. Now Poppy watched from the window as Diane Ashworth sat in the parked car for several minutes without getting out. She had her phone up and appeared to be reading something. Then she made a call. Poppy couldn't hear anything, obviously. She was 2 floors up behind glass, but she could see the way Diane's expression changed when the call connected. Not the professional smoothness she'd worn in the hallway, something harder, something directed. The call lasted about 4 minutes. Then Diane put the phone down, fixed her expression back into place, and got out of the car. Poppy put down her book and went to find her grandfather. Howard was in the kitchen. He was the other early riser in the family, and he was standing at the counter in his bathrobe making coffee when Poppy appeared in the doorway. "Grandpa," she said. "Mrs. Ashworth is outside." Howard turned around. "What?" "She pulled up a few minutes ago. She was on the phone in her car. She's walking up now." He frowned and looked at the clock on the microwave. 6:14. "She probably has something for me to sign," he said, almost to himself. "The documents. I told her Friday didn't work after all." "Grandpa." Poppy stepped into the kitchen. Her socks were the ones with small foxes on them. She stood very still, the way she always did when she was about to say something she'd already decided. "I don't think you should sign anything today, Pops. I watched her for 5 minutes before she got out of the car. She didn't look like she does at your office. People look different when they think no one's watching. That's exactly what I mean." The doorbell rang. Howard looked at his granddaughter. She looked back at him. 9 years old, standing in fox socks in his kitchen at 6 in the morning, telling him something was wrong with the precision of someone who had thought it through. He opened the back door instead of the front. "Go get your mother," he said quietly. "Knock on her door. Don't rush. Don't wake Marcus. Just tell her I need her downstairs." Poppy nodded once and went. Diane was surprised to find Evelyn standing in the kitchen when Howard finally opened the front door and brought her inside. She recovered quickly, she always did, but there was a half-second of recalibration that Evelyn, who had spent years as a social worker reading rooms, did not miss. "I'm so sorry to come on a weekend," Diane said. "I know it's terribly early. I wanted to make sure Mr. Callahan had everything he needed before the markets open Monday." She placed a folder on the kitchen table. "It's just the transfer authorization. We discussed it on Thursday." "We discussed it in general terms," Howard said. He had put on his glasses. He sat down at the table and opened the folder. Evelyn stood near the counter and said nothing. "The deadline for the new structure is Monday morning," Diane said. "It's a narrow window, but the tax benefit is substantial. I outlined it in the memo." "You did." Howard turned a page, then another. "This is a full transfer of the personal portfolio. Into the management vehicle, yes. As we discussed moving portions of the portfolio, a beat. I may have expanded the scope slightly based on the modeling. The numbers really do support a full consolidation without asking me. I was going to walk you through it when you signed." Howard took off his glasses. He set them on the table next to the folder. Then he looked up at Diane Ashworth in a way that 30 years of cross-examination had refined into something close to a force of nature. "Diane," he said, "I've been doing this for a long time, and in that time I have learned one thing with absolute certainty. When someone tries to rush you through paperwork at 6 in the morning on a Saturday, the paperwork is not in your favor." Diane's expression did not change, but something behind it went very still. "This is a standard structure," she said. "I can send you the precedents." "I'd like that," Howard said. "Send them Monday, to my email and to Patterson's. We'll review together." The deadline. If the deadline doesn't allow for review, then the deadline isn't real. He didn't sign. Diane left 20 minutes later with the folder under her arm and a smile that did not reach anywhere near her eyes. Howard walked her to the door, watched her get into the black car, watched her drive away, and then stood in the doorway for a long moment looking at the street. Evelyn was at the kitchen table when he came back in. She had made fresh coffee. Poppy was back upstairs, presumably with her book. "How deep is it?" Evelyn asked. "I don't know yet." Howard sat down. "I need Patterson to pull her references, really pull them. Not just a call, paper trail, employment history, every firm she's touched in the last 15 years. And the documents she brought? I want a forensic accountant looking at the management vehicle, the structure, where it's registered, who the beneficiaries are." Evelyn wrapped both hands around her mug. "Dad, how long has she had access?" Howard didn't answer for a moment. He was looking at the window, at the empty driveway where the black car had been. "Too long," he said, "but not long enough. That's the thing she didn't count on." He paused. "She needed me to sign what Patterson found. Took 3 weeks." The management vehicle Diane had prepared was registered in the name of a numbered company in New Brunswick, with a secondary holding structure in Barbados. The beneficial ownership, buried 4 layers down in the paperwork, traced back to a man named Clive Forsyth, Diane's former brother-in-law with whom she had remained apparently in very close contact despite a divorce 12 years prior. The transfer, if completed, would have moved the entirety of Howard's personal investment portfolio, just over $4 million, into a structure that Diane and Forsyth controlled entirely. She had done it before. The London, Ontario case was the one that had almost caught her. There had been two others, smaller, in Nova Scotia and in Alberta, where the transfers had gone through before anyone understood what had happened. One of those victims had never fully recovered financially. He was 74 and living in a subsidized apartment in Dartmouth. The RCMP Financial Crimes Unit took the file in November. Howard was told the investigation would be thorough and would take time. He said he understood. He'd cooperated with everything they asked. Diane Ashworth was arrested on a Tuesday morning outside a coffee shop on Yonge Street in Toronto. Howard heard about it from Patterson, who called him at the office. Howard put down the phone and sat quietly for a moment, and then he went back to work. He drove to Guelph that weekend. Not the last Sunday of the month. Just a Sunday. He brought raisin scones from the bakery on King Street, enough for everyone, and he sat at Evelyn's kitchen table while Poppy showed him a book she was reading about birds of the Canadian Shield. "This one," Poppy said, pointing to a page. "The Boreal chickadee. It caches food for the winter. It remembers where every single piece is. That's remarkable. It has a bigger hippocampus than other birds. That's the part of the brain for memory." She looked up at him. Did they catch her? Howard had not told Poppy what happened. She had not been told any of it, as far as he knew. "Yes," he said, "they did." Poppy nodded and turned back to her book. "Good. Can I ask you something?" She looked up again. "That morning," Howard said, "when you told me not to sign, what was it you saw exactly?" From the window. Poppy considered this with the full seriousness she brought to everything. She sat in the car for a long time before she got out. People who are doing something normal don't need to prepare themselves like that. Howard looked at his granddaughter. And when she was on the phone, Poppy continued, she kept checking the house. Not looking at it, checking it. Like she was watching for something. And that told you something was wrong. It told me she wasn't thinking about you. She was thinking about herself. Poppy shrugged slightly, the way 9-year-olds do when they have said something obvious. People who want to help you think about you. Howard sat with that for a while. Outside, Marcus was doing something in the garden. A blue jay landed on the fence and regarded them through the window. "Your grandmother used to say something similar," Howard said finally. "She said you could always tell what someone wanted by watching what they paid attention to." Poppy smiled. It was, for just a moment, so precisely Carol's smile that Howard had to look away. "I know," Poppy said. "Mum told me." Howard restructured his firm's financial oversight that winter, external audits quarterly. No single person with full portfolio access. Patterson sat on the review committee, as did a retired judge Howard had known for 20 years. He also drove to Guelph more often, not every Sunday, but enough. Enough to learn which particular boreal birds Poppy had identified in the conservation area behind the subdivision, and enough to finally be taught at considerable length the correct ratio of butter to egg for scrambled eggs done properly. He got it wrong the first 3 times. Poppy corrected him without impatience, the way she corrected everything, precisely and without making you feel small for not having known. The 4th time, he got it right. She looked at the pan, then at him, and gave a single, considered nod of approval. Howard laughed. It came out of him suddenly, the real kind, the kind he hadn't heard from himself in longer than he could say. "There," Poppy said, and went to get the plates.